"Hey, sweetheart, why don't you bring that pretty little behind over here and pour us some more coffee?" sneered the leather-clad biker, slapping my rear end as I walked past his table at Mel's Diner on Route 66. "And maybe you can serve us something special that ain't on the menu, if you know what I mean." His three companions erupted in crude laughter, making obscene gestures and comments that would have made a sailor blush. What they didn't know was that the helpless little waitress they were harassing was Linda Rose Martinez, wife of Jake Iron Horse Martinez, president of the Riverside chapter of the Hells Angels. And in about 20 minutes, when my husband arrived for our usual Tuesday lunch date, these wannabe tough guys were about to learn that respect isn't optional, it's required. My name is Linda Rose Martinez, and this is the story of how a quiet Tuesday afternoon in 1976 became one of the most talked about incidents in the history of Riverside, California's motorcycle community. I was 28 years old then, a former nurse who had chosen to work as a waitress at Mel's Diner to help support our family, while my husband Jake led one of the most respected motorcycle clubs in Southern California. Most people who saw me in my pink uniform and comfortable shoes had no idea that I rode a Harley-Davidson Sportster, could handle a .38 Special, and was married to a man whose word was law among the brotherhood that outsiders feared and misunderstood. Growing up in East Los Angeles as the daughter of Mexican immigrants, I learned early that respect was something you earned through strength, loyalty, and the willingness to stand up for yourself and your family. My father, Ramon Martinez, was a mechanic who taught me that people would treat you exactly how you allowed them to treat you. "Mija, never let anyone make you feel small or powerless," he would tell me as we worked together in his garage. "Dignity isn't something someone gives you. It's something you take and protect. The moment you accept disrespect, you teach people that's all you deserve." Those lessons served me well when I met Jake Martinez at a motorcycle rally in 1971. He was already a prospect with the Hells Angels, a man whose quiet confidence and fierce loyalty to his brothers made him a natural leader within the club's hierarchy. Unlike the stereotypes portrayed in movies and sensational news stories, Jake was intelligent, honorable, and deeply committed to the code of brotherhood that governed his life. "Linda, being with me means being part of something that most people don't understand," he told me honestly during one of our early conversations. "We're not criminals or thugs. We're a family of men who've chosen to live by our own rules and protect each other no matter what the cost." The Hells Angels of the 1970s were far more complex than the media portrayals suggested. While the club certainly attracted men who lived outside conventional society's rules, it also provided structure, loyalty, and purpose for veterans, working-class men, and others who felt disconnected from mainstream American culture. The Brotherhood offered something that many of its members had never experienced: unconditional acceptance and support from men who would literally die for each other. When Jake and I married in 1973, I understood that I was joining not just a man, but a community with its own traditions, obligations, and ways of handling problems. The wives and girlfriends of club members formed their own tight-knit support network. Women who understood the unique challenges of loving men, who lived by codes that prioritized brotherhood above everything except family. "Being an old lady means you're protected by every member of this club," explained Susan Red Thompson, wife of the club's sergeant-at-arms, during my introduction to the women's informal organization. "But it also means you represent all of us, and how you carry yourself reflects on your man and his brothers." The decision to work at Mel's Diner was practical rather than necessary, as I wanted to contribute to our household income, while also maintaining some independence and connection to the mainstream world that existed alongside our motorcycle community. The diner job allowed me to use skills I had developed as a nurse while earning money that helped us save for the house we planned to buy in a better neighborhood where we hoped to raise children. Most of my coworkers and regular customers knew me simply as Linda, a friendly waitress who worked hard, treated everyone with respect, and minded her own business. The few who knew about my connection to the Hells Angels respected the boundary between my work life and my personal life, understanding that discretion was important for everyone's comfort and safety. Linda's good people was how Mel Kowalski, the diner's owner, described me to anyone who asked. "She shows up on time, does her job well, and never brings any drama to work. That's all I care about. The harassment that began on that Tuesday in August 1976 started small and escalated quickly, as 4 bikers from a rival club called the Iron Horsemen decided to assert their dominance over what they perceived as neutral territory. They were passing through Riverside on their way to a rally in Arizona, and they seemed determined to cause trouble wherever they stopped. "This is a nice little place you got here," the apparent leader announced loudly as they swaggered into the diner. "Real homey. Hope the service is as sweet as the scenery." From the moment they sat down in my section, their behavior was deliberately intimidating and disrespectful. They made crude comments about my appearance, grabbed at me when I brought their orders, and spoke loudly about their sexual exploits and criminal activities in ways designed to make other customers uncomfortable. "Come on, honey, don't be so uptight," the leader said when I asked them to keep their hands to themselves. "We're just being friendly, unless you got a problem with bikers." The other customers in the diner, mostly elderly retirees, traveling families, and local workers on their lunch breaks, were clearly uncomfortable with the bikers' behavior, but were too intimidated to say anything. The hostility and sexual harassment were creating an atmosphere of fear that was affecting everyone in the restaurant. "Linda, maybe you should ask Mel to handle this," whispered Betty, the other waitress on duty, as she watched the bikers becoming increasingly aggressive and disruptive. But I had learned from my father and my husband that running away from bullies only encouraged them to continue their behavior. Instead of retreating, I decided to stand my ground and handle the situation professionally, while making it clear that their behavior was unacceptable. "Gentlemen, I'm here to serve food and drinks, nothing else," I told them firmly but politely. "If you can't treat me and the other customers with respect, you'll need to find somewhere else to eat. Before you continue this incredible story of respect, justice, and the power of standing up to bullies, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more amazing tales about ordinary people who faced extraordinary situations and discovered their own strength in the process." The response to my request for respectful behavior was immediate and ugly, as the leader stood up and moved into my personal space in a way that was clearly meant to intimidate me. "Listen here, little girl. You don't get to tell us how to behave," he snarled, his breath reeking of alcohol and cigarettes. "We're paying customers, and if we want to have some fun with the help, that's our business. Maybe you need to learn some manners about how to treat your betters." His hand shot out and grabbed my wrist, squeezing hard enough to leave bruises while his companions laughed and made encouraging comments about teaching the uppity waitress a lesson. The physical contact crossed a line that transformed harassment into assault, and I knew that the situation was about to escalate beyond anything that could be handled through polite requests or professional boundaries. "Take your hands off me right now," I said loudly enough for everyone in the diner to hear, pulling my wrist free and stepping back to create distance between us. "Touch me again and you'll regret it." My voice was calm, but carried an authority that surprised the bikers, who had expected either submission or hysteria from what they perceived as a helpless victim. The leader's face darkened with anger at my defiance, and I could see him calculating whether to escalate the confrontation into something more serious. "You got a real mouth on you, don't you, sweetheart?" he said menacingly. "Maybe we need to take you outside and teach you some respect for your betters. What do you think, boys? Should we show this little waitress what happens to girls who don't know their place?" The threat of sexual violence was explicit and terrifying, but it was also the moment when I stopped being afraid and started getting angry. These men had mistaken kindness for weakness, professional courtesy for submission, and they were about to learn that some people couldn't be intimidated or victimized without consequences. "You have exactly 30 seconds to apologize and leave this diner," I told them, my voice carrying a certainty that seemed to surprise everyone present, including myself. The laughter that erupted from the 4 Iron Horsemen at my ultimatum was loud and mocking, filled with the confidence of men who believed they had found an easy target. 30 seconds? The leader repeated incredulously. "Or what? You gonna call the cops, little girl? You gonna cry for help?" His companions slapped the table in amusement. making crude gestures and comments about what they planned to do to me once they got me alone outside the diner. What they didn't notice was the rumble of approaching motorcycles that was growing louder by the second, or the way my expression changed from fear to anticipation as I heard the familiar sound of Harley-Davidson engines that I knew better than my own heartbeat. "Actually," I said with a smile that probably looked more predatory than friendly, "I think I'm going to let my husband explain to you why that's not going to happen." The front door of Mel's diner swung open with enough force to rattle the glass, and Jake Martinez walked in, followed by 5 of his Hells Angels brothers, their leather jackets bearing the distinctive patches that identified them as members of one of the most feared and respected motorcycle clubs in America. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees as 6 men who commanded respect through reputation and presence surveyed the scene before them. Jake was 6'2", and 220 pounds of muscle hardened by years of construction work and motorcycle riding, with steel-gray eyes that missed nothing, and a presence that made smart people think twice before causing trouble. The patches on his jacket identified him as president of the Riverside chapter, a position he had earned through loyalty, intelligence, and the kind of leadership that inspired other strong men to follow him willingly. "Afternoon, darling," he said to me in a voice that was calm, but carried undertones of barely controlled violence. "Everything okay here?" The Iron Horsemen's bravado evaporated like water on hot concrete as they realized they had been harassing the wife of a Hells Angels president. The leader's face went pale beneath his beard as he recognized the patches and colors that marked Jake and his brothers as members of a club that had earned its reputation through decades of enforcing its own brand of justice. "Oh, shit," whispered one of the Iron Horsemen. "Do you know who that is?" "That's Jake Martinez," hissed another. "Iron Horse Martinez, president of Riverside. We are so fucked." The casual arrogance that had characterized their behavior just moments before was replaced by the kind of fear that comes from realizing you've made a potentially fatal mistake. They had violated one of the most sacred rules of the motorcycle world. Never disrespect a brother's old lady. Jake's approach to the table was deliberate and unhurried, like a predator who knows his prey has nowhere to run. "Gentlemen," he said in a conversational tone that somehow managed to be more intimidating than shouting, "I understand you've been having a conversation with my wife. I hope it's been a pleasant one, because it's about to become very unpleasant for you if I find out you've been anything less than respectful." The leader of the Iron Horsemen tried to salvage the situation with bluster and false bravado, but his voice shook as he spoke. "Look, we didn't know she was your old lady, man. We were just having some fun, you know. No harm meant." His attempt at casual dismissal of their behavior only served to make Jake's expression more dangerous, as the Hells Angels president stepped closer to the table. "No harm meant?" Jake repeated softly, his voice carrying the kind of quiet menace that made smart people very nervous. "You put your hands on my wife. You threatened her. You made her workplace unsafe and uncomfortable. And now you're telling me no harm was meant." He turned to look at me, his eyes softening slightly. "Linda, sweetheart, did these gentlemen apologize for their behavior?" "No, Jake," I replied, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "They haven't apologized. In fact, they were just threatening to take me outside and teach me some respect when you arrived." The collective intake of breath from Jake's brothers was audible, and I could see the leader of the Iron Horsemen realizing that his situation had just become exponentially worse. The code that governed interactions between motorcycle clubs was complex but absolute when it came to protecting family members, and the Iron Horsemen had violated that code in the most serious way possible. "Brothers," Jake said without taking his eyes off the 4 men at the table. "It seems we have a situation here that requires our immediate attention. These gentlemen need to learn about respect, and I think it's our responsibility to provide that education." The transformation in the diner's atmosphere was immediate and palpable, as other customers began quietly paying their bills and leaving while Mel Kowalski disappeared into the kitchen, understanding that whatever was about to happen was club business that civilians shouldn't witness. The Iron Horsemen found themselves surrounded by men who had spent years earning reputations for handling problems with decisive action. "Look, Martinez, this doesn't have to get ugly," the leader said, his earlier arrogance replaced by the kind of desperation that comes from recognizing that you're completely outmatched. "We'll apologize to your old lady and be on our way. No problem, right? Just a misunderstanding between brothers." His attempt to claim brotherhood status with the Hells Angels was met with cold stares that made clear such claims were not accepted. "See, that's where you're wrong," Jake replied, his voice remaining conversational despite the violence that everyone could feel building in the air. "This stopped being a misunderstanding the moment you put your hands on my wife. This became personal. And when something becomes personal with the Hells Angels, we handle it permanently." The youngest of the Iron Horsemen, who couldn't have been more than 22, began to panic visibly as he realized the gravity of their situation. "Please, man, we didn't know," he pleaded. "We're sorry, okay? We're really sorry. Can't we just say we're sorry and leave?" His fear was genuine and pathetic, but it was also too late to matter. "Sorry doesn't fix disrespect," explained Tommy Wrench Rodriguez, Jake's sergeant-at-arms and closest friend. "Sorry doesn't undo threats against a brother's family. Sorry is just words, and words don't mean shit when you've crossed lines that shouldn't be crossed." His calm explanation of club justice was more terrifying than any shouted threat could have been. The leader made one last desperate attempt to avoid the consequences of his actions by reaching for the gun that everyone could see outlined beneath his jacket. It was the worst possible decision he could have made, as Jake's hand shot out like a striking snake, grabbing the man's wrist and applying pressure that made him scream and release his weapon before it cleared leather. "Now that," Jake said with genuine satisfaction, "was definitely the wrong choice." The sound of the gun hitting the floor was followed by the distinctive click of switchblades opening, as Jake's brothers prepared to deliver the kind of lesson that would be remembered and talked about in motorcycle circles for years to come. The beating that followed was swift, professional, and educational, rather than lethal, as the Hells Angels demonstrated the difference between casual troublemakers and serious men who had built their reputations on the willingness to back up their words with action. "This is what happens when you disrespect a brother's family," Jake explained to the groaning leader as the lesson concluded. "This is what you'll remember every time you think about putting your hands on someone who doesn't belong to you." The aftermath of the confrontation was both immediate and lasting, as word of what had happened at Mel's Diner spread throughout the motorcycle community within hours. The Iron Horsemen's humiliation became legendary, serving as a cautionary tale about the consequences of disrespecting the families of Hells Angels members. "Those boys learned a hard lesson about respect," was how other bikers would describe the incident for years afterward. "They learned that some people can't be messed with, and some lines shouldn't be crossed." The local police response was minimal and disinterested, as the Riverside Sheriff's Department had long ago learned that motorcycle club disputes were best left to resolve themselves as long as they didn't involve civilians or result in deaths. "What happened?" asked Deputy Sheriff Martinez, no relation, when he arrived 30 minutes after the Iron Horseman had limped away. "Some bikers had an accident with the stairs outside," Mel Kowalski replied deadpan. "Clumsy fellows. Kept falling down." The relationship between the Hells Angels and local law enforcement was complex but functional, based on mutual understanding that the club policed its own members and handled its own problems without involving the courts or creating paperwork that nobody wanted to deal with. "Jake Martinez runs a tight ship," Sheriff Williams would later explain to reporters. "His boys cause less trouble than the college kids on weekend nights. They handle their business quietly and don't bother civilians." The support I received from the other diner employees and regular customers was overwhelming and touching, as people who had witnessed the harassment expressed their admiration for how I had handled the situation. "Linda, I've never seen anything like that," said Betty, the other waitress, her voice filled with awe. "The way you stood up to those men, knowing your husband was coming, that took real courage. Most women would have just taken the abuse and hoped it would stop." But the real lesson of that day wasn't about violence or intimidation. It was about the importance of respect, dignity, and the willingness to stand up for yourself and your loved ones when faced with people who mistake kindness for weakness. What those boys didn't understand, Jake explained to me that evening as we talked about the incident, is that respect isn't something you take from people. It's something you earn by treating others the way you want to be treated. The changes in how I was treated at work were immediate and noticeable, as word of my connection to the Hells Angels spread throughout the local community. Some people became more respectful, understanding that I was under the protection of men who took such protection seriously. Others became more distant, made uncomfortable by associations they didn't understand. It's like people see you differently when they know who you're married to, I confided to Susan Thompson during one of our weekly coffee meetings. Some treat you like you're dangerous, others like you're royalty. The incident also deepened my understanding of the motorcycle community and the complex codes that governed relationships within and between clubs. The Hells Angels weren't just a group of men who liked to ride motorcycles together. They were a brotherhood bound by loyalty, honor, and shared commitment to protecting each other and their families from a world that often viewed them with suspicion and hostility. Being part of this club means something. Jake told me during one of our conversations about the responsibilities that came with our lifestyle. It means you're never alone, never without backup, never without brothers who will stand with you no matter what the cost. But it also means you carry yourself with dignity, and remember that everything you do reflects on the club and the brothers who trust you. The pregnancy I discovered 6 weeks after the diner incident brought new dimensions to our life and our relationship with the club, as Jake's brothers embraced their roles as honorary uncles who would help protect and guide the next generation. This baby will grow up in a family of men who understand what loyalty means, Jake said, as we discussed names and plans for our future. He or she will never have to wonder if someone has their back, because they'll always be surrounded by people who would die before letting harm come to family. The son we welcomed in March 1977, Michael James Martinez, became the unofficial mascot of the Riverside chapter, a child who grew up understanding that he was part of something larger than just our immediate family. The Hells Angels, who served as his godfathers, taught him lessons about honor, loyalty, and the importance of standing up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. "Uncle Tommy, why do some people say bad things about Daddy's club?" Michael asked during one of the family barbecues that brought together club members and their families. "Because some people are afraid of what they don't understand, little man," Tommy Rodriguez replied. "Your daddy and his brothers are good men who live by their own rules and take care of their own people. Sometimes that scares folks who think everyone should be the same." The community service projects that the club undertook, toy drives for underprivileged children, benefit rides for families facing medical emergencies, security for charity events, showed a side of the Hells Angels that never made the newspapers, but was central to how the members saw themselves and their responsibilities. "We take care of our own, but we also take care of our community," Jake would say when people asked about the club's charitable activities. "Strength without compassion is just bullying." The decades that followed brought changes to both our family and the motorcycle community, as the Hells Angels evolved with the times while maintaining the core values that had always defined the brotherhood. The wildness and violence of the 1970s gave way to a more structured organization that focused on business interests and family responsibilities, while still maintaining the loyalty and protection that had always been central to club culture. The club gave me a family when I needed one, purpose when I was lost, and brothers who stood by me through everything life threw our way, Jake reflected during our 25th wedding anniversary celebration in 1998. "It gave our son a foundation of loyalty and honor that will serve him well no matter what he chooses to do with his life." The diner incident became family legend, a story told and retold at gatherings and celebrations as an example of how respect and dignity must be defended, regardless of the cost. "Your mother faced down 4 men who thought they could intimidate her," Jake would tell Michael and his younger sister Sarah. "She stood her ground because she knew that some things are worth fighting for, and that bullies only understand strength." Looking back on that Tuesday afternoon in 1976, I understand that the confrontation at Mel's Diner was about much more than a few bikers behaving badly toward a waitress. It was about the importance of standing up for yourself and your values, about the power of having people who will support you when facing adversity, and about the truth that respect is earned through character rather than intimidation. The Hells Angels gave me a family of brothers and sisters who understood that loyalty means something, that your word is your bond, and that protecting the people you love is not negotiable. The club taught me that strength comes not from the ability to hurt others, but from the willingness to stand between harm and the people who matter to you. The woman who was harassed by 4 bikers in 1976 learned that day that she was stronger than she had known, more protected than she had realized, and part of a community that would never allow her to face danger alone. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected moments, and sometimes discovering your own strength requires facing people who mistake your kindness for weakness. The legacy of that day lives on in the respect I earned from people who witnessed my courage, the love that deepened between Jake and me through shared trials, and the understanding that dignity is not something that can be taken from you. It's something you choose to maintain regardless of how others choose to behave.